At the edge of Willow Street, where rows of neatly trimmed lawns and cheerful homes lined both sides of the road, there stood a house that seemed untouched by time itself. It wasn't just old, it was forgotten. Its peeling paint hung in tired strips like loose bandages, revealing the weathered wood beneath. The porch sagged slightly, as if it had given up, trying to hold its shape after decades of wear. A single rocking chair sat crookedly in the corner, its backrest splintered and faded from years of sun and rain. Even the mailbox leaned forward at an awkward angle, looking more like a relic than a functional piece of everyday life. This was Mr. Henry's home. Mr. Henry wasn't exactly invisible. He was simply overlooked. He lived quietly, almost deliberately, so choosing solitude over company. His neighbors often passed his house without giving it much thought. To them, he was just the old man who kept to himself. If they ever noticed him sitting on his porch, or tending to a small patch of garden, they might nod politely, but rarely stop to chat. After all, what could anyone really say to someone who never spoke first? He was a tall man with thinning gray hair and hands wrinkled from years of hard work. His eyes were kind, though distant, as if he carried secrets too heavy to share. He walked slowly these days, favoring one leg over the other due to an old injury no one asked about. Most people assumed he preferred being alone, but the truth was far simpler. Mr. Henry had learned long ago that loneliness wasn't something you chose, it found you when everything else slipped away. And then there was Bruno. Bruno was not just a dog. He was Mr. Henry's constant companion, his shadow, his confidant. An aging Labrador mix with fur, once golden brown, but now streaked with silver. Bruno had been with Mr. Henry for nearly 12 years. Back then, Bruno had been full of energy, bounding through fields, chasing squirrels, and wagging his tail so hard it looked like it might fly off. But time had taken its toll. His movements were slower now, his muscles stiffened by arthritis, and his once a shiny coat dulled by age. Yet despite his physical decline, Bruno's spirit remained unbroken. His deep brown eyes still held a spark of curiosity, a quiet intelligence that made him seem almost human. To most people, however, Bruno was anything but endearing. The neighborhood kids whispered about him whenever they passed Mr. Henry's gate. Some called him creepy, others grumpy. They pointed at his hunched posture and low growl when strangers came too close. None of them understood that Bruno wasn't mean, he was simply protective. Years of loyalty to Mr. Henry had taught him to be wary of outsiders, especially those who stared too long or lingered too near the fence. But the children didn't know any of this. All they saw was a big, scary dog behind a rusted gate. What they failed to notice was how Bruno rested his head gently on Mr. Henry's knee every evening, sighing contentedly as the old man scratched behind his ears. Or how during rare moments of sunlight breaking through the clouds, Bruno would stretch out on the porch basking in the warmth, while Mr. Henry read aloud from his worn collection of books. These were quiet joys shared between two souls who needed each other more than words could express. Just 3 doors down from Mr. Henry's house lay the heart of the neighborhood, the playground. It was a lively place, always buzzing with activity. Swings creaked rhythmically as children pumped their legs higher and higher. Laughter erupted from the sandbox, where toddlers built castles, only to knock them down again. Parents lounged on benches, chatting idly while keeping half an eye on their little ones. The air smelled faintly of freshly cut grass and sunscreen, mingling with the occasional whiff of popcorn from the street vendor parked nearby. For Tommy, an 8-year-old boy with boundless energy and an insatiable curiosity, the playground was paradise. Unlike many of his peers, Tommy didn't stick to one activity for long. One moment, he'd be racing across the monkey bars, shouting triumphantly as he reached the end. The next, he'd be climbing the jungle gym, pretending it was a pirate ship sailing stormy seas. His favorite game, though, involved kicking around his soccer ball, a bright red and white orb that seemed permanently attached to his foot. Tommy's parents often joked that he had springs in his shoes. No matter how fast they tried to keep up, he was always ahead of them, darting off to explore some new corner of the world. Today was no different. As the afternoon sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the playground, Tommy chased his soccer ball with reckless abandon. "Be careful." His mother called out half-heartedly, knowing her warning would go unheeded. Tommy grinned over his shoulder, his cheeks flushed pink from exertion. "I'm fine, Mom!" His ball bounced erratically, skittering past the swings, and narrowly missing a toddler before rolling toward the edge of the playground. Tommy sprinted after it, his sneakers slapping against the pavement. He didn't think twice about crossing the boundary marked by the rusted chain-link fence. It was just a ball. Just a chase. Just a game. But sometimes even the simplest actions can set wheels in motion that change everything. As Tommy disappeared beyond the fence, none of the adults noticed. They were too busy chatting or scrolling through their phones. And Mr. Henry? He was inside sipping tea and listening to the distant hum of laughter. Little did anyone realize that tonight, the lonely house on Willow Street would play a role none of them could have predicted. Because tonight, Bruno stirred. The sun sank lower in the sky, painting the horizon in hues of orange and pink. Shadows stretched long across the playground, swallowing the vibrant colors of the day. Parents began calling their children home, their voices, weaving together in a chorus of goodbyes and promises to return tomorrow. "Come on, sweetie, dinner's ready. 5 more minutes, please." "Okay, but hurry up." Laughter echoed through the air, mingling with the soft chirping of crickets waking up for the night. The playground slowly emptied, leaving behind only the faint squeak of swings swaying gently in the breeze. But Tommy wasn't among the children heading home. Unbeknownst to anyone, he had followed his soccer ball beyond the fence, a simple act that would soon spiral into something far greater. The ball had rolled onto the cracked pavement of an abandoned lot adjacent to the playground. Overgrown weeds sprouted between fissures in the asphalt, and piles of discarded junk littered the area. Old tires, broken furniture, and rusted metal scraps lay scattered like forgotten relics of another era. At the far end of the lot stood an ancient van, its body covered in layers of grime and graffiti. Paint peeled away in large flakes, exposing patches of dull metal beneath. Tommy hesitated for a moment, glancing back toward the playground. The sounds of laughter and conversation felt impossibly distant, now muffled by the eerie stillness of the dumping ground. For a brief second, doubt flickered in his mind. Should he go back? No. It was just a ball. Just a chase. Just a game. He stepped forward, his sneakers crunching against gravel and debris. The ball lay near the van, partially hidden under a cluster of dry leaves. Tommy crouched down, reaching for it. That's when he heard it. A groan. Low and unnatural, it sent shivers crawling up his spine. He froze his fingers inches from the ball. The sound came again, metal shifting against metal, slow and deliberate. It seemed to emanate from the van itself, its rusted frame protesting some unseen force. Tommy straightened, his heart beginning to race. He glanced around nervously, half expecting someone to jump out and yell, "Gotcha!" But there was no one. Only silence greeted him, thick and suffocating. Then, without warning, the van's rear door gave way. With a loud creak, the heavy metal frame collapsed inward, pulling the latch mechanism along with it. Startled, Tommy stumbled backward, losing his footing on the uneven ground. He fell, landing hard on his backside. Before he could scramble to his feet, the door swung shut with a deafening clang, trapping him inside. Darkness enveloped him instantly. Panic surged through Tommy's chest as he pushed himself upright, his palms scraping against the rough interior surface. The air smelled musty, laced with the sharp tang of rust and decay. He blinked rapidly, trying to adjust to the absence of light, but it was futile. The van's windows were grimy and opaque, offering no glimpse of the outside world. "Help!" he shouted, his voice trembling. But the walls swallowed his cry, absorbing it like a sponge. Outside, the faint hum of evening continued uninterrupted. No one heard him. Tommy pounded on the door with his fists, desperation mounting with each passing second. "Let me out! Somebody help!" Nothing. Tears welled up in his eyes as reality sank in. He was trapped. Meanwhile, back on Willow Street, the world carried on, oblivious to Tommy's plight. Lights flickered on inside cozy homes as families gathered around dinner tables. Dogs curled up in warm corners, content and safe. And yet, amidst the routine of daily life, something stirred. Bruno lifted his head, ears perked and alert, his gaze fixed intently on the gate, his body tensing as if responding to some invisible signal. Whatever it was, it gnawed at him, an instinctive pull he couldn't ignore. Mr. Henry glanced up from his book, noticing the change in his dog's demeanor. "What's gotten into you?" he murmured softly. Bruno didn't respond. Instead, he rose to his feet, ignoring the stiffness in his joints. His tail remained still, his entire focus directed outward. Something was wrong. Terribly wrong. Without waiting for permission, Bruno padded toward the gate and nudged it open with his nose. The hinges squeaked faintly as he slipped through, disappearing into the twilight. He moved quickly despite his age, following a scent trail so faint it might as well have been invisible. Through back alleys and across busy roads, past barking dogs and curious stares, Bruno pressed onward. Each step brought him closer to the source of his unease. Somewhere out there, someone needed him. And tonight, Bruno would answer the call. The sun had long since dipped below the horizon, leaving behind a sky painted in shades of indigo and black. Streetlights flickered on one by one, casting pools of yellow light onto Willow Street. The air grew cooler, carrying with it the faint scent of damp earth and fallen leaves. It was the kind of evening that usually signaled peace, a time for families to gather around dinner tables, share stories, and prepare for the quiet calm of night. But tonight, there was no peace. Tommy's parents, Sarah and Mark, sat side by side on their living room couch, their faces pale with worry. The clock on the wall ticked loudly each second, stretching into an eternity as they waited for news, any news that might tell them where their son was. Their hands were clasped tightly together, knuckles white from the effort of holding on, both physically and emotionally. "He's never stayed out this late before," Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. She glanced at the window, half expecting to see Tommy racing up the driveway, his soccer ball tucked under one arm and a sheepish grin on his face. But the driveway remained empty, the street silent, except for the occasional hum of a passing car. Mark nodded slowly, though his eyes betrayed the storm raging within him. "We'll find him," he said, more to reassure himself than his wife. He probably just lost track of time. But even as he spoke, the words doubt gnawed at the edges of his mind. Tommy wasn't reckless. He knew better than to wander off without telling anyone. Something didn't feel right. Sarah stood abruptly, pacing across the room like a caged animal, her fingers twisted nervously around the hem of her sweater. "What if something happened? What if he's hurt?" she asked, her voice rising with every word. "We should have been watching him closer. Don't do this to yourself," Mark replied gently, standing to pull her into his arms. "You can't blame yourself. We'll figure this out." Yet deep down, neither of them believed those words. Fear clung to them like a second skin, suffocating and relentless. By the time darkness fully enveloped, the neighborhood panic had begun to spread. Word traveled quickly among the residents of Willow Street. Someone mentioned seeing Tommy playing soccer earlier that afternoon, but no one recalled noticing when or if he'd gone home. Others speculated about where he might have gone, their voices tinged with unease. "Did you check the playground?" Mrs. Peterson asked, clutching her shawl tightly around her shoulders as she joined the conversation outside her house. "Yes, we looked everywhere," Sarah replied, her voice hollow. "He's not there." "Well, maybe he went over to Jake's house," suggested Mr. Thompson, who lived 2 doors down. "Those two are always together." "No, I already called Jake's mom," Mark interjected. "Jake hasn't seen him all day." As the minutes turned into hours, the once bustling neighborhood transformed into a scene of organized chaos. Neighbors gathered in small clusters, discussing theories and exchanging worried glances. Some volunteered to search nearby streets while others combed through backyards and alleys. Flashlights bobbed in the darkness like fireflies, their beams cutting through the shadows as people called out Tommy's name. "Tommy, are you out here? Tommy, it's okay. Come home." Each unanswered call sent another ripple of dread coursing through the community. Meanwhile, inside the van, Tommy struggled to keep his breathing steady. The air was thick and stale, making it hard to draw a full breath. Every sound, the distant hum of traffic, the rustle of leaves, the occasional bark of a dog, felt impossibly far away, as though he were trapped in some otherworldly dimension. "Help!" he croaked weakly, his voice barely audible even to himself. His throat felt raw from shouting, his fists sore from pounding against the unyielding metal door. He slumped against the wall, tears streaming down his face. For the first time in his young life, Tommy understood what true fear felt like. Outside, the world continued its oblivious march forward. Cars drove past headlights, illuminating the dumping ground briefly before moving on. Crickets chirped rhythmically, undisturbed by the drama unfolding mere feet away. And yet somewhere in the distance, a pair of sharp brown eyes scanned the darkness. Bruno moved with purpose, his nose twitching as he followed the faintest trace of Tommy's scent. The trail led him through narrow alleyways cluttered with trash bins and discarded furniture. His paws padded silently over cracked pavement, avoiding shards of glass and puddles of murky water. Despite his age, his instincts remained razor-sharp, honed by years of loyalty and experience. Every so often, he paused to sniff the air, his ears swiveling toward any unusual sound. Once, a stray cat darted out from behind a dumpster, startling him momentarily. But Bruno didn't let it distract him for long. His focus was singular, unshakable. Somewhere ahead, Tommy needed him. Back on Willow Street, the search intensified. Police officers arrived shortly after midnight, their presence bringing a mix of relief and dread. Blue and red lights flashed silently as officers fanned out across the neighborhood, organizing volunteers into teams and assigning specific areas to cover. Officer Ramirez approached Sarah and Mark, her expression sympathetic but firm. "We're doing everything we can," she assured them, "but I need you to think carefully. Is there anywhere else Tommy might have gone? Any friends or places he likes to visit?" Sarah shook her head, tears streaming down her cheeks. "No, he wouldn't go anywhere without telling us. He knows better." Mark placed a comforting hand on her shoulder, though his own face was etched with worry. "What about the park? Could he have wandered too far?" "We've already checked the park," Officer Ramirez replied. "But we'll expand the search area. If he's still nearby, we'll find him." Despite her reassurances, the weight of uncertainty hung heavy in the air. The officer set up a command post near the playground, using flashlights and megaphones to coordinate efforts. Residents brought coffee and blankets, offering what little comfort they could. Children tucked safely into bed listened, wide-eyed, to the commotion outside. Parents hugged them tighter than usual, whispering prayers of gratitude that their own kids were safe. While the adults searched frantically, Bruno forged ahead, driven by a force beyond logic or reason. The scent trail grew stronger, now guiding him toward the industrial edge of the neighborhood. Here the houses gave way to warehouses, and abandoned lots, their skeletal structures looming ominously against the night sky. The dumping ground loomed ahead, its jagged outline illuminated faintly by the moon. Bruno slowed his pace, his hackles rising as he approached the rusted van. There was no mistaking it. The scent of fear mingled with Tommy's familiar aroma, creating a cocktail of urgency that spurred him onward. He stopped a few feet away, his body rigid with tension. For a moment he simply stared at the van, his ears pricked and his tail stiff. Then, with a deep, rumbling growl, he began to bark. The sound echoed through the deserted lot, sharp and insistent. Inside the van, Tommy heard it. At first he thought he was imagining things, a trick of his exhausted mind conjuring hope from despair. But then it came again, louder this time. A bark, followed by another, and another. "Bruno?" Tommy called hoarsely, pressing his hands against the metal walls. "Is that you?" Bruno barked again, his voice filled with a mixture of urgency and triumph. He circled the van, sniffing at every crack and crevice, searching for a way in. When none presented itself, he resumed barking, determined to alert anyone nearby to Tommy's plight. Unbeknownst to Bruno, his efforts were not in vain. A patrol officer cruising through the area heard the commotion and decided to investigate. Officer Martinez pulled his squad car to the side of the road, stepping out cautiously with his flashlight in hand. "What's going on here?" he muttered, scanning the dimly lit lot. That's when he saw it, a large dog standing beside a rusted van, barking furiously. The sight was strange enough to warrant further inspection. As Officer Martinez approached, he noticed scratches on the van's exterior, as though someone or something had been trying to break in. "Hey, buddy," he said, softly, kneeling to calm the agitated dog. "What's wrong?" Bruno ignored him, continuing to bark and paw at the van. Something inside caught the officer's attention. A faint tapping sound, rhythmic and desperate. "Hello?" Officer Martinez called out, rapping his knuckles against the metal. "Is someone in there? Help me," came the muffled reply. Without hesitation, Officer Martinez radioed for backup and retrieved a crowbar from his trunk. Within minutes, reinforcements arrived, including paramedics prepared for the worst. Together they worked to pry open the stubborn door, their movements quick and efficient despite the tension in the air. Finally, with a loud groan, the door swung open. Tommy blinked in the sudden brightness, shielding his eyes with one hand. He looked disheveled and frightened, but otherwise unharmed. Paramedics rushed to his side, wrapping him in a blanket and checking for injuries. "It's okay, son," Officer Martinez said gently. "You're safe now." Tommy nodded mutely, tears streaming down his face as relief washed over him. Bruno watched from a distance, his tail wagging slowly as he realized his mission was complete. Exhaustion finally caught up with him, and he sank to the ground, panting heavily. His body ached, his muscles screamed in protest, but none of that mattered. He had done what he was meant to do. As the officers loaded Tommy into an ambulance, one of them noticed the dog lingering nearby. "Is this your dog, kid?" he asked, gesturing toward Bruno. Tommy managed a weak smile. "Yeah, that's Bruno." Officer Martinez frowned slightly, recalling the rumors he'd heard about the grumpy old mutt from Willow Street. Now, looking at the weary but triumphant dog, he couldn't help but feel a pang of guilt. "Looks like we owe him a big thank you," he said, scratching Bruno behind the ears. Bruno closed his eyes contentedly, his tail thumping against the ground. By the time dawn broke over Willow Street, the neighborhood buzzed with news of Tommy's rescue. Word spread quickly about the heroic dog who had refused to give up leading authorities straight to the missing boy. Sarah and Mark embraced their son tightly, tears of joy streaming down their faces. They thanked everyone involved, from the police officers to the neighbors who had spent hours searching tirelessly. But when they learned about Bruno's role in saving Tommy, their gratitude knew no bounds. "Thank you," Sarah told Mr. Henry, her voice choked with emotion. "If it weren't for Bruno—" Mr. Henry smiled faintly, his eyes glistening with pride. "He's a good dog," he said simply. From that day forward, Bruno became a legend on Willow Street. The same children who had once called him creepy or grumpy now greeted him with smiles and treats. Parents taught their kids the importance of kindness, reminding them that appearances can be deceiving. And as for Mr. Henry, he found himself surrounded by neighbors, eager to chat, share stories, and express their gratitude. The lonely house on Willow Street was no longer lonely. It had become a symbol of hope, resilience, and the enduring bond between humans and animals. Sometimes the hero is the one we least expect. The morning sun rose hesitantly over Willow Street, casting a golden glow across rooftops and driveways. It was the kind of light that promised renewal, a fresh start after a long, restless night. Yet for the residents of this quiet suburban neighborhood, sleep had been fleeting, if it came at all. The events of the previous evening lingered, like an unshakable shadow, coloring every thought and action with a mix of relief and reflection. Tommy's rescue had been nothing short of miraculous. News of his safe return spread quickly, carried door to door by neighbors eager to share the story. By breakfast time, everyone knew about the old van in the dumping ground, the trapped boy, and the dog who refused to give up. But even miracles leave scars, both visible and invisible, and the wounds of the night before were far from healed. For Sarah and Mark, the hours following Tommy's rescue passed in a blur of hugs, tears, and whispered prayers of gratitude. Their son sat wrapped in a blanket on the couch, sipping hot chocolate, as though it might chase away the lingering chill of fear. His face was pale but calm, his eyes wide, as he recounted the harrowing ordeal to anyone who asked. "I couldn't breathe," he said softly, clutching his mug tightly. "It smelled really bad inside, and I kept yelling for help, but no one heard me." Sarah knelt beside him, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead. Her hands trembled slightly, betraying the storm still raging within her. "You're safe now, sweetheart. That's all that matters." Mark nodded, though his jaw remained clenched, a silent testament to the anger and guilt he struggled to suppress. He replayed the evening endlessly, in his mind, the missed signs, the unanswered calls, the moments when Tommy might have needed them most. "We should have been watching him more closely," he muttered under his breath, pacing the living room floor. "No," Sarah replied firmly, standing to meet his gaze. "This wasn't your fault or mine. We can't blame ourselves for something we couldn't control." Her words were meant to comfort, yet they rang hollow even to her own ears. Guilt has a way of settling deep into the soul, its roots spreading until they choke out reason. Outside, the neighborhood buzzed with activity. Volunteers who had spent the night searching returned home to rest their faces, etched with exhaustion, but also relief. Parents hugged their children tighter than usual, whispering reminders to stay close and be careful. Children, sensing the gravity of the situation without fully understanding it, played quietly, their laughter subdued compared to the usual chaos of mornings on Willow Street. And then there was Mr. Henry. Mr. Henry stood on his porch, cradling a steaming cup of tea between his weathered hands. His eyes scanned the street, taking in the subtle changes wrought by the night's drama. Neighbors lingered longer on sidewalks, exchanging stories and shaking their heads in disbelief. Cars slowed as they passed his house drivers, glancing curiously at the aging dog, lying patiently at his feet. Bruno seemed oblivious to the attention, or perhaps indifferent. His head rested on his paws, his breathing slow and steady. To anyone unfamiliar with him, he appeared much the same as always, quiet, reserved, content to observe rather than participate. But those who had known him before last night saw something different. There was a newfound dignity in his posture, a quiet pride that radiated from his weary frame. "He saved my boy," Sarah said aloud, during one such conversation, her voice thick with emotion. She stood near the edge of her driveway, addressing a small group of neighbors gathered to discuss the rescue. If it weren't for Bruno. The sentiment echoed throughout the neighborhood, growing louder with each retelling. Children who had once called Bruno creepy or grumpy now approached him cautiously, holding out treats and toys as peace offerings. Parents encouraged this newfound respect, reminding their kids of the lesson embedded in the story. Appearances can deceive, and heroes often come in unexpected forms. Even Officer Martinez, who had initially dismissed Bruno as just another stray, found himself reflecting on the encounter. As he typed up his report later that day, he included a note about the dog's pivotal role in locating Tommy. Without him, he wrote, "We might not have found the boy in time." By mid-morning, the dumping ground had become a focal point of interest. Curious residents ventured to the abandoned lot, drawn by morbid fascination and a desire to understand how such a tragedy could unfold so close to home. The van loomed ominously in the center of the clearing, its rusted frame illuminated starkly by the sunlight. Police tape surrounded it, fluttering gently in the breeze. Officers combed the area for clues, documenting the scene with meticulous precision. "It's a miracle he survived," Officer Ramirez remarked, crouching beside the vehicle. She ran her fingers along the jagged edges of the collapsed door, noting the force required to pry it open. Beside her, Officer Martinez nodded grimly. "Kids shouldn't be playing around here anyway. Someone needs to clean this place up." Indeed, the dumping ground was a hazard waiting to happen. Piles of debris littered the lot, creating treacherous obstacles for anyone venturing too far off the beaten path. Tires, broken furniture, and scraps of metal lay scattered haphazardly, their sharp edges glinting menacingly in the daylight. Graffiti covered the walls of nearby warehouses, adding to the sense of neglect and decay. As the officers worked, a small crowd gathered beyond the perimeter tape. Among them was Tommy, accompanied by his parents and a few curious neighbors. Despite the warmth of the sun, Sarah clutched her son's hand tightly, unwilling to let him out of her sight. "That's where you were?" she asked softly, pointing toward the van. Tommy nodded, his expression somber. "Yeah, I didn't mean to go there. I was just chasing my ball." Mark placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "It's okay, buddy. You're safe now." Officer Ramirez approached the family, her demeanor professional but compassionate. "We'll make sure this doesn't happen again," she promised. "The city will send someone to clear out the dumping ground and will increase patrols in the area." Sarah thanked her sincerely, though her eyes betrayed a flicker of doubt. Promises were easy to make. Keeping them was another matter entirely. Back on Willow Street, life began to settle into a semblance of normalcy. Children returned to the playground, their laughter echoing once more through the air. Parents resumed their routines, though, with a heightened awareness of their surroundings. And Bruno? Bruno became a local celebrity. Every afternoon, a steady stream of visitors made their way to Mr. Henry's house, bearing gifts of treats, toys, and heartfelt thanks. The elderly man welcomed them graciously, though his demeanor remained unchanged. For him, Bruno's heroism was simply an extension of the loyalty and love the dog had shown him for years. "He's always been special," Mr. Henry said modestly during one such visit. "I'm just glad others are starting to see it too." Children flocked to the gate, calling out Bruno's name and giggling as he wagged his tail lazily in response. Some dared to pet him, marveling at the softness of his fur and the warmth in his eyes. Others stood back, content to admire him from afar. "He doesn't seem scary at all," one little girl remarked shyly, clutching a stuffed animal she'd brought as a gift. "No, he doesn't," her mother agreed, smiling fondly at the scene. Even the adults who had once dismissed Bruno as nothing more than a nuisance found themselves warming to him. They stopped by to chat with Mr. Henry, sharing stories of their own pets and expressing admiration for the bond between man and dog. "He's a good boy," Mrs. Peterson said, approvingly, scratching Bruno behind the ears. "A real hero." Bruno accepted the praise with characteristic humility, his tail thumping gently against the porch floor. If he understood the magnitude of what he had done, he gave no outward sign. To him it had simply been his duty, a task born of instinct and devotion. As days turned into weeks, the neighborhood underwent a subtle transformation. Conversations shifted from gossip and idle chatter to discussions of safety, responsibility, and compassion. Parents organized meetings to address concerns about the dumping ground and other potential hazards. Children learned valuable lessons about staying aware of their surroundings and respecting boundaries. At the heart of it all was Bruno. His presence served as a constant reminder of the power of kindness and the importance of looking beyond surface impressions. Those who had once judged him unfairly now saw him as a symbol of hope and resilience. Even Tommy, whose life he had saved, developed a deep affection for the dog. Every afternoon he visited Mr. Henry's house, bringing snacks and toys to share. Sometimes they would sit together on the porch talking about school soccer and other adventures. Other times they simply enjoyed each other's company, finding comfort in the quiet companionship only animals can offer. "You're my hero," Bruno Tommy declared one sunny afternoon, wrapping his arms around the dog's neck. Bruno licked his face affectionately, eliciting a burst of laughter from the boy. Nearby, Mr. Henry watched the scene unfold with a gentle smile. His eyes sparkled with pride, not just for Bruno but for the Pulipurno entire neighborhood. In saving Tommy, Bruno had done more than rescue a single child. He had united a community, bridging gaps and fostering connections that might otherwise have remained dormant. Sometimes the hero is the one we least expect, and sometimes the greatest acts of bravery stem not from grand gestures, but from quiet, unwavering devotion. The days following Tommy's rescue brought a sense of calm to Willow Street, but it was the kind of calm that follows a storm, fragile and tinged with unease. Life resumed its rhythm, yet beneath the surface subtle shifts were taking place. Conversations carried an undertone of reflection. Laughter seemed a little softer, and even the air felt heavier, as though the neighborhood itself was processing what had happened. For Mr. Henry, life hadn't changed much, or so it seemed on the outside. He still rose early each morning, brewed his tea, and tended to the small patch of garden in his backyard. But there was something different about him now, a lightness in his step perhaps, or a warmth in his gaze when he greeted passers-by. For years he had lived quietly content in his solitude, but now he found himself drawn into the fabric of the community in ways he never anticipated. Bruno, too, had undergone a transformation, not physically, for age had already etched its marks upon him, but emotionally. The once overlooked dog now basked in the affection of neighbors who had finally come to appreciate him. Children knocked on Mr. Henry's gate daily, eager to share snacks or simply sit near the dog they now called a hero. Adults stopped by more frequently, offering friendly smiles and heartfelt thanks. Yet despite the newfound attention, Bruno remained true to himself. He didn't seek praise or validation. Instead, he accepted it graciously, as if understanding that this was simply part of his role. His loyalty to Mr. Henry never wavered, nor did his quiet vigilance over the world beyond their fence. And then one evening that vigilance sparked anew. It began subtly, a twitch of Bruno's ears, a slight tilt of his. As he listened intently to sounds only he could hear, the sun had dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across Willow Street. The neighborhood was settling into its nightly routine. Families gathered around dinner tables, televisions hummed softly in living rooms, and the faint chirping of crickets filled the cooling air. Mr. Henry sat on his porch reading a book by the dim glow of a lantern. Bruno lay at his feet, his breathing slow and steady. All seemed peaceful, until it wasn't. Bruno lifted his head suddenly, his body stiffening as though an invisible thread had pulled taut within him. His nose twitched, catching scents carried on the breeze. His ears swiveled toward the gate, alert and focused. "What is it, boy?" Mr. Henry asked, closing his book and leaning forward slightly. Bruno didn't respond immediately. Instead, he stood slowly, his movements deliberate despite the stiffness in his joints. His tail remained still, his eyes fixed on the gate as though trying to see through it. "Something wrong?" Mr. Henry pressed, his voice tinged with concern. Bruno let out a low whine, pacing back and forth near the gate. It was a sound unlike any Mr. Henry had heard from him before. Not quite a growl, not quite a bark, but something in between. Whatever it was, it sent a shiver down the old man's spine. "You want out?" Mr. Henry asked, rising cautiously. Bruno turned to look at him, his deep brown eyes filled with urgency. He barked once, sharp and insistent, before returning his gaze to the gate. All right, Mr. Henry muttered, making his way down the porch steps. Let's see what's got you so worked up." He unlatched the gate, and Bruno bolted through without hesitation. The aging dog moved with surprising speed, his paws padding silently over pavement and grass alike. He followed a trail invisible to human eyes, guided by instincts honed over years of companionship and protection. Each step took him farther from the safety of home, deeper into the labyrinth of streets and alleys that made up Willow Street. Behind him, Mr. Henry hesitated at the edge of his driveway, watching as Bruno disappeared into the twilight. "Where are you going?" he called after the dog, though he knew better than to expect an answer. A flicker of worry crept into his chest. Bruno had always been dependable, his actions driven by purpose rather than impulse. If he was running off like this, it meant something significant was happening. But what? Mr. Henry glanced back at his house, torn between staying put and following his dog. Years of solitude had taught him to avoid unnecessary risks, yet something about Bruno's behavior compelled him to act. With a sigh, he grabbed a flashlight from the porch and set off after the dog. As Bruno navigated the winding streets, his senses continued to guide him. The scent trail led him past familiar landmarks: the playground where children laughed during the day, the corner store where neighbors exchanged pleasantries, the narrow alleyways where stray cats prowled and then veered sharply toward the industrial edge of the neighborhood. Here the houses gave way to warehouses and empty lots, their skeletal structures looming ominously against the night sky. The dumping ground loomed ahead, its jagged outline illuminated faintly by the moon. Bruno slowed his pace as he approached, his hackles rising as he caught sight of the rusted van. Memories of the previous week surged through him, the frantic barking, the desperate tapping from inside, the overwhelming sense of urgency that had driven him to act. But tonight the van was silent. Bruno paused, sniffing the air cautiously. Something was different. The scent trail led not to the van, but beyond it, into the darker recesses of the dumping ground. He hesitated briefly, his instincts warring with caution. Then, with a determined growl, he pressed onward. Meanwhile, Mr. Henry struggled to keep up. Age had slowed him considerably, and the uneven terrain made navigation difficult. His flashlight beam danced erratically over cracked pavement and piles of debris, illuminating glimpses of Bruno's silhouette as the dog darted ahead. "Bruno!" he called out, his voice echoing faintly in the deserted lot. "Come back here!" But Bruno didn't stop. Frustration mingled with fear as Mr. Henry pushed himself harder, his breath coming in ragged gasps. "What's gotten into you?" he muttered under his breath. He rounded a corner and spotted Bruno standing near the edge of the dumping ground, his body rigid with tension. The dog barked sharply, drawing Mr. Henry's attention to a figure huddled nearby. It was a child. A young girl no older than 6 or 7 sat trembling amidst the wreckage, her arms wrapped tightly around her knees. Her face was streaked with dirt and tears, her clothes torn and disheveled. She looked up at the sound of Bruno's bark, her wide eyes filled with terror. "It's okay," Mr. Henry said quickly, lowering his flashlight to avoid startling her further. "We're not going to hurt you." The girl didn't respond, her gaze shifting warily between the two figures approaching her. Bruno, however, wasted no time. He padded gently toward her, his tail wagging slowly as he sniffed her hand. After a moment's hesitation, she reached out tentatively, letting him nuzzle her fingers. "He won't hurt you," Mr. Henry reassured her, kneeling carefully beside her. "He's a good dog." The girl nodded mutely, her grip on Bruno's fur tightening slightly. "Do you live around here?" Mr. Henry asked softly. She shook her head, her lips quivering as she tried to speak. I got lost." "Lost?" Mr. Henry repeated, glancing around at the desolate landscape. "How did you end up here?" "I was playing hide and seek," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I ran too far." Understanding dawned on Mr. Henry's face. Hide and seek, an innocent game, turned dangerous. How many times had he seen children darting through these streets, oblivious to the risks lurking just beyond their safe havens? "We'll get you home," he promised, placing a comforting hand on her shoulder. Bruno barked again, as if emphasizing the point. By the time Officer Martinez arrived, alerted by a call from Mr. Henry, the girl was sitting safely in the back seat of Mr. Henry's car, wrapped in a blanket and sipping water. Her parents, frantic with worry, soon joined them, showering her with hugs and tears of relief. "You saved her," the girl's mother said, gripping Mr. Henry's hand tightly. "Thank you." "It wasn't me," Mr. Henry replied modestly, gesturing toward Bruno. "It was him. Officer Martinez nodded approvingly. "Looks like we've got another hero on our hands." Bruno wagged his tail lazily, seemingly unfazed by the attention. As the family drove away, promising to visit soon, Mr. Henry turned to Bruno with a weary smile. "You've done it again, haven't you?" he murmured, scratching the dog behind the ears. Bruno leaned into the touch, his eyes closing contentedly. Back on Willow Street, the story of the lost girl spread quickly, adding another layer to Bruno's legend. Neighbors marveled at his ability to sense danger, his unwavering dedication to protecting those in need. "He's not just a dog," Mrs. Peterson declared during one such conversation. "He's a guardian angel." Others nodded in agreement, their admiration evident. Even Tommy, who had grown particularly fond of Bruno, couldn't help but feel a sense of awe. "You're amazing, Bruno," he said one afternoon, tossing a ball for the dog to fetch. "You saved me, and now you've saved someone else. You're like a superhero." Bruno retrieved the ball and dropped it at Tommy's feet, his tail thumping gently against the ground. In saving others, Bruno had become more than just a pet or companion. He had become a symbol of hope, resilience, and unconditional love. Sometimes the greatest heroes are the ones we least expect. And sometimes their acts of bravery remind us of the power of connection, compassion, and trust. The evening air was cool, and still carrying with it the faint scent of damp earth and freshly cut grass. On Willow Street, the world seemed to pause in quiet reflection, as though holding its breath after the whirlwind of events that had unfolded over the past weeks. Yet for Bruno, the aging Labrador mix, there was no time for rest. His instincts had been ignited once more, pulling him inexorably toward a purpose he couldn't ignore. Mr. Henry stood at the edge of his driveway, watching as Bruno disappeared into the twilight. The old man's heart ached with a mix of pride and worry. He had seen this determination in his dog before, the same unyielding focus that had led Bruno to Tommy's rescue and later to the lost girl. But each time Bruno ran off, it felt like a gamble, a leap of faith that the dog would return safely, having fulfilled whatever mission called to him. "Be careful, boy," Mr. Henry whispered into the gathering darkness, though he knew Bruno was already far out of earshot. Bruno moved with purpose, his nose close to the ground as he followed the faintest traces of scent. To an outsider, the trail might have seemed invisible, a mere whisper carried on the wind, but to Bruno it was as clear as a beacon. Each step took him farther from the familiar comforts of home, deeper into the labyrinth of streets and alleys that bordered Willow Street. His body protested every movement. Age had stiffened his joints, and arthritis made each stride a test of endurance. Yet none of that mattered now. Something or someone was in trouble, and Bruno's loyalty demanded nothing less than his all. The scent trail led him away from the playground, past rows of quiet houses, where families gathered around dinner tables, their laughter spilling through open windows. It skirted the edge of the neighborhood, veering toward the industrial zone, where warehouses loomed like silent giants against the night sky. Here the air smelled different, sharp and metallic, tinged with the acrid tang of rust and decay. Bruno slowed his pace as he approached the dumping ground once again. The jagged outline of the rusted van rose ominously in the distance, its shadow stretching long across the cracked pavement. Memories of Tommy's rescue surged through him, the frantic barking, the desperate tapping from inside, the overwhelming sense of urgency that had driven him to act. But tonight the van wasn't the source of his unease. Instead, the scent trail veered sharply to the left, leading toward a narrow alley between two crumbling warehouses. Bruno hesitated briefly, his ears swiveling to catch any unusual sounds. A distant clatter echoed through the darkness, followed by a soft whimper. It was enough. With renewed determination, Bruno pressed onward, his paws crunching softly over gravel and debris. Meanwhile, back on Willow Street, Mr. Henry wrestled with his decision to follow. Part of him wanted to stay put, trusting that Bruno would handle whatever lay ahead. After all, the dog had proven himself capable time and again. But another part, the part that had raised Bruno from a scrappy pup into the loyal companion he was today, couldn't shake the gnawing feeling that something was wrong. Grabbing his flashlight and a light jacket, Mr. Henry set off after his dog. The journey was harder than he anticipated. Years of solitude and limited physical activity had taken their toll, leaving him winded after just a few blocks. Yet he pushed forward, driven by a mixture of concern for Bruno and curiosity about what had drawn the dog so far from home. As he neared the industrial edge of the neighborhood, the comforting hum of suburban life faded into eerie silence. The only sounds were the occasional creak of metal shifting in the breeze and the distant rumble of traffic on nearby highways. Shadows stretched unnaturally long, distorting the shapes of abandoned machinery and piles of discarded junk. "Bruno!" Mr. Henry called out, his voice trembling slightly. "Where are you?" His flashlight beam swept across the desolate landscape, illuminating glimpses of Bruno's silhouette as the dog darted ahead. Finally, he spotted him near the mouth of the alley, his body rigid with tension. "What is it, boy?" Mr. Henry asked, catching up to the dog. Bruno barked sharply, drawing his master's attention to a figure huddled in the shadows. It was a boy no older than 10, sitting slumped against the wall of the warehouse. His face was pale, his clothes torn and dirty. Blood trickled from a gash on his forehead, and his breathing came in shallow gasps. "Oh my God," Mr. Henry muttered, rushing to the boy's side. The child stirred weakly, his eyes fluttering open. "Help!" he croaked, his voice barely audible. "It's okay, son," Mr. Henry said, gently placing a reassuring hand on the boy's shoulder. "We're here to help." Bruno stood nearby, his tail wagging slowly as if to say, "I told you so." The boy's name was Ethan, as they learned later. He had been playing with friends near the industrial zone when he tripped and fell, hitting his head on a piece of scrap metal. Dazed and disoriented, he had wandered into the alley, unable to find his way back. By the time Bruno located him, Ethan had been unconscious for hours, his condition worsening with each passing minute. Mr. Henry acted quickly, using his jacket to apply pressure to the wound on Ethan's forehead, while calling for emergency services. Bruno stayed close, his presence offering a strange kind of comfort to both the injured boy and his worried master. When paramedics arrived, they praised Mr. Henry's quick thinking and Bruno's keen instincts. "If it weren't for your dog, we might not have found him in time," one of the medics said, loading Ethan onto a stretcher. "He's got a knack for finding people," Mr. Henry replied modestly, scratching Bruno behind the ears. As the ambulance sped away, sirens wailing softly in the night, Mr. Henry turned to Bruno with a weary smile. "You've done it again, haven't you?" he murmured. Bruno wagged his tail lazily, seemingly unfazed by the chaos around him. Back on Willow Street, news of Ethan's rescue spread quickly, further cementing Bruno's status as a local hero. Neighbors marveled at his ability to sense danger, his unwavering dedication to protecting those in need. "He's not just a dog," Mrs. Peterson declared during one such conversation. "He's a guardian angel." Others nodded in agreement, their admiration evident. Even Tommy, who had grown particularly fond of Bruno, couldn't help but feel a sense of awe. "You're amazing, Bruno," he said one afternoon, tossing a ball for the dog to fetch. "You saved me, and now you've saved someone else. You're like a superhero." Bruno retrieved the ball and dropped it at Tommy's feet, his tail thumping gently against the ground. In saving others, Bruno had become more than just a pet or companion. He had become a symbol of hope, resilience, and unconditional love. Sometimes the greatest heroes are the ones we least expect, and sometimes their acts of bravery remind us of the power of connection, compassion, and trust. The night was unrelenting, its darkness stretching endlessly across Willow Street and the surrounding neighborhoods. Shadows crept along the edges of alleys and abandoned lots, swallowing the faint glow of distant streetlights. The air carried an eerie stillness, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves, or the distant hum of traffic on highways far removed from this quiet corner of suburbia. Yet amidst the silence there was movement, a purposeful stride that defied the weight of age and fatigue. Bruno's journey had taken him farther than ever before, his body pushed to its limits in pursuit of something he couldn't yet see but instinctively understood. His paws ached with each step, and his muscles screamed in protest as he navigated the uneven terrain of the industrial zone. But none of that mattered now. Something or someone was calling to him, tugging at the very core of his being, with an urgency he could not ignore. Behind him, Mr. Henry struggled to keep up his flashlight beam, dancing erratically over cracked pavement and piles of debris. The old man's breath came in ragged gasps, his legs trembling with exertion. He had always known Bruno was special, but tonight the dog seemed almost otherworldly in his determination. "Bruno!" Mr. Henry called out again, his voice hoarse from exhaustion. "Wait for me!" But Bruno didn't stop. His focus was singular, unshakable. He moved like a shadow through the darkness, drawn inexorably toward the source of the distress signal only he could perceive. The scent trail led him deeper into the labyrinth. of warehouses where towering structures loomed ominously against the night sky. Here the world felt different, cold and hollow, as though life itself had been drained away. The air smelled sharp and metallic, laced with the tang of rust and oil. Puddles of stagnant water reflected the pale light of the moon, their surfaces rippling faintly in the breeze. Bruno slowed his pace as he approached a narrow passageway between two crumbling buildings. The scent grew stronger here, mingling with the unmistakable odor of fear. His ears swiveled forward, catching the faintest sound, a whimper barely audible beneath the oppressive silence. He paused, his body rigid with tension. Then, with a deep rumbling growl, he stepped into the shadows. Inside the passageway, the scene unfolded before him like a grim tableau. A young boy lay sprawled on the ground, his clothes torn and stained with dirt. Blood trickled from a gash on his forehead, matting his hair and staining his face. His breathing was shallow, his skin pale and clammy. Bruno approached, cautiously sniffing the boy's hand gently. The child stirred weakly, his eyelids fluttering open. "Help!" the boy whispered, his voice trembling with pain and fear. Bruno barked sharply, the sound echoing through the narrow space like a clarion call. It was a bark unlike any he had uttered before, loud, insistent, and filled with urgency. Moments later, Mr. Henry appeared at the mouth of the passageway, his flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. "What is it, boy?" he asked, hurrying toward the dog. Bruno stood protectively beside the injured boy, his tail wagging slowly as if to say, "Here. This is why we're here." "Oh my God," Mr. Henry muttered, dropping to his knees beside the child. "Are you okay, son? Can you hear me?" The boy nodded weakly, tears streaming down his face. I fell. "It's all right," Mr. Henry reassured him, placing a comforting hand on the boy's shoulder. "We'll get you help." Using his jacket, he applied pressure to the wound on the boy's forehead, trying to stem the flow of blood. "Hold on, son," he said softly. "Just hold on." Bruno remained close, his presence offering a strange kind of comfort. His steady gaze seemed to anchor both Mr. Henry and the boy, grounding them in the chaos of the moment. As they waited for help to arrive, the enormity of what had happened began to sink in. Bruno had done it again, followed an invisible thread of intuition to save someone who might otherwise have been lost forever. When paramedics finally arrived, they worked quickly to stabilize the boy, loading him onto a stretcher and preparing him for transport to the hospital. One of the medics turned to Mr. Henry, her expression filled with gratitude. "You saved his life," she said, gesturing toward Bruno. "If your dog hadn't found him." She didn't finish the sentence, but the implication hung heavy in the air. "He's got a knack for this kind of thing," Mr. Henry replied modestly, scratching Bruno behind the ears. Bruno wagged his tail lazily, seemingly unfazed by the attention. Back on Willow Street, the story of Ethan's rescue spread like wildfire. Neighbors gathered in small clusters, marveling at Bruno's uncanny ability to sense danger and act decisively. Children who had once feared him now regarded him with awe, bringing treats and toys as tokens of gratitude. Adults spoke of him with reverence, their voices tinged with admiration and respect. "He's not just a dog," Mrs. Peterson declared during one such conversation. "He's a guardian angel." Others nodded in agreement, their eyes shining with emotion. Even Tommy, who had grown particularly fond of Bruno, couldn't help but feel a surge of pride whenever he saw the aging dog. "You're amazing, Bruno," he said one afternoon, tossing a ball for the dog to fetch. "You've saved so many people. You're like a superhero." Bruno retrieved the ball and dropped it at Tommy's feet, his tail thumping gently against the ground. In saving others, Bruno had become more than just a pet or companion. He had become a symbol of hope, resilience, and unconditional love. Sometimes the greatest heroes are the ones we least expect, and sometimes their acts of bravery remind us of the power of connection, compassion, and trust. The ambulance sped away its siren, wailing softly into the night, carrying Ethan to the hospital, where doctors would tend to his injuries and ensure he made a full recovery. Behind it, the dumping ground fell silent once more, the chaos of the rescue fading like shadows retreating before dawn. But for Mr. Henry and Bruno, the events of the evening lingered, a vivid reminder of the fragility of life and the profound impact one act of kindness could have. Mr. Henry stood at the edge of the alley, watching as the red and blue lights disappeared around a distant corner. His flashlight beam flickered weakly, its batteries drained from hours of use. He turned to Bruno, who sat patiently beside him, his breathing slow and steady despite the exertion of the long journey. "You did good tonight, boy," Mr. Henry said softly, kneeling to scratch behind the dog's ears. "Real good." Bruno leaned into the touch, his tail wagging gently. There was no arrogance in his demeanor, no sense of pride or expectation. He had simply done what came naturally, what years of loyalty and instinct had taught him to do. Yet in that simplicity lay a depth of character that left even Mr. Henry humbled. As they began the walk back home, the neighborhood seemed quieter than before, almost reverent in the aftermath of the drama. Streetlights cast pools of golden light onto empty sidewalks, their glow softened by the cool night air. Crickets chirped rhythmically, filling the silence with their soothing song. It was a stark contrast to the tension and urgency of earlier, a gentle reminder that life moves forward even after moments of crisis. When they reached Willow Street, the house on the corner felt warmer somehow, as though its walls had absorbed the gratitude of those whose lives Bruno had touched. Mr. Henry unlatched the gate and stepped inside, Bruno following close behind. The porch creaked softly under their weight as they settled into their usual spots. The old man in his rocking chair, the dog stretched out at his feet. For a while, neither moved nor spoke. The quiet between them wasn't uncomfortable. Rather, it was filled with unspoken understanding. Years of companionship had forged a bond that transcended words, allowing them to share thoughts and emotions without uttering a single syllable. Finally, Mr. Henry broke the silence. "I've always known you were special, Bruno," he murmured, his voice tinged with emotion. "But I don't think I ever truly understood just how special until now." Bruno lifted his head slightly, his deep brown eyes meeting Mr. Henry's gaze. For a moment it felt as though the dog was trying to convey something, perhaps reassurance, perhaps gratitude, or maybe just an acknowledgement of the connection they shared. "You're not just my dog," Mr. Henry continued, his voice cracking slightly. "You're my friend, my family." Bruno rested his head back on his paws, his tail thumping gently against the wooden floor. By morning, the story of Ethan's rescue had spread throughout the neighborhood, carried door to door by eager voices, and shared over cups of coffee and breakfast tables. Parents hugged their children tighter than usual, whispering reminders to stay safe and avoid wandering too far. Children listened wide-eyed, their imaginations painting vivid pictures of Bruno as a heroic figure akin to the characters in their favorite books and movies. "Did you hear?" Mrs. Peterson asked excitedly during a chance encounter with Sarah, Tommy's mother. "That wonderful dog saved another child last night." Sarah nodded, her expression softening as she recalled the role Bruno had played in rescuing her own son. "He's incredible," she said warmly. "We owe him so much." Others echoed similar sentiments, their admiration for Bruno growing with each retelling of the story. "He's like a guardian angel," someone remarked during a casual conversation outside the corner store. "A true hero," another agreed, nodding emphatically. Even Officer Martinez, who had initially dismissed Bruno as nothing more than a stray, found himself reflecting on the encounter. As he typed up his report later that day, he included a note about the dog's pivotal role in locating Ethan. Without him, he wrote, we might not have found the boy in time. That afternoon, a steady stream of visitors made their way to Mr. Henry's house, bearing gifts of treats, toys, and heartfelt thanks. Children knocked on the gate, calling out Bruno's name and giggling as he wagged his tail lazily in response. Adults stopped by to express their gratitude, sharing stories of their own pets and marveling at the bond between man and dog. "He's a good boy," Mrs. Peterson said approvingly, scratching Bruno behind the ears. "A real hero." Bruno accepted the praise with characteristic humility, his tail thumping gently against the porch floor. If he understood the magnitude of what he had done, he gave no outward sign. To him, it had simply been his duty, a task born of instinct and devotion. Yet for those who had witnessed his actions, Bruno represented something greater. He was a symbol of hope, resilience, and unconditional love. Tommy visited daily, bringing snacks and toys to share with his newfound hero. Sometimes they would sit together on the porch, talking about school soccer and other adventures. Other times they simply enjoyed each other's company, finding comfort in the quiet companionship only animals can offer. "You're amazing, Bruno," Tommy declared one sunny afternoon, tossing a ball for the dog to fetch. "You've saved so many people. You're like a superhero." Bruno retrieved the ball and dropped it at Tommy's feet, his tail wagging lazily. In saving others, Bruno had become more than just a pet or companion. He had become a part of the community's collective memory, a living testament to the power of loyalty, compassion, and trust. Sometimes the greatest heroes are the ones we least expect. And sometimes their acts of bravery remind us of the importance of looking beyond appearances, of recognizing the value in those who may seem ordinary but possess extraordinary hearts. The days that followed Ethan's rescue brought a sense of renewal to Willow Street, as though the neighborhood itself had been reborn. The onhearing air seemed lighter, the laughter of children brighter, and even the rusted mailbox at Mr. Henry's house appeared less weary, as if it too could feel the shift in energy. Bruno, the aging Labrador mix, who had once been dismissed as creepy or grumpy, was now the talk of the town, a figure so revered that his name carried weight equal to any local celebrity. Every morning, without fail, visitors arrived at Mr. Henry's gate bearing gifts for Bruno. Children came with toys they'd outgrown but were eager to share their faces, beaming with admiration. Adults brought treats, homemade biscuits, chewy bones, and even gourmet snacks from specialty pet stores, all accompanied by heartfelt thanks. Some simply stopped by to sit on the porch, sharing stories of their own pets while marveling at the bond between man and dog. For Mr. Henry, this newfound attention was both heartwarming and overwhelming. He had spent years living quietly content in his solitude, never seeking recognition or praise. Yet here he was, surrounded by neighbors, eager to chat, express gratitude, and include him in their lives. It wasn't just Bruno who had become a legend. Mr. Henry found himself drawn into the fabric of the community in ways he never anticipated. "You've done so much for all of us," Mrs. Peterson said one afternoon, clutching a plate of freshly baked cookies. "We can't thank you and Bruno enough." "It's not me you should thank, Mr. Henry," replied modestly, gesturing toward the dog lounging lazily at his feet. "He's the one who deserves your gratitude." Bruno accepted the compliment with characteristic humility, his tail thumping gently against the wooden floor. If he understood the magnitude of what he had done, he gave no outward sign. To him, it had simply been his duty, a task born of instinct and devotion. The transformation in how people viewed Bruno was remarkable. Gone were the whispers of fear and disdain that had once followed him. Instead, there was only admiration, respect, and an almost reverential awe. Parents taught their children valuable lessons about kindness and compassion, using Bruno's story as an example of why appearances can deceive. "Don't judge someone or something until you know them," Sarah told Tommy during one such conversation. "Remember how everyone thought Bruno was scary? And look at him now, he's a hero." Tommy nodded, solemnly clutching a stuffed animal he had brought for Bruno. "Yeah, he's the best dog ever." Even the adults who had once dismissed Bruno as nothing more than a nuisance found themselves warming to him. They stopped by to chat with Mr. Henry, sharing stories of their own pets and expressing admiration for the bond between man and dog. "He's a good boy," Mr. Thompson remarked, approvingly scratching Bruno behind the ears. "A real hero." Bruno wagged his tail lazily, seemingly unfazed by the attention. As the weeks passed, the neighborhood underwent a subtle but profound transformation. Conversations shifted from gossip and idle chatter to discussions of safety, responsibility, and compassion. Parents organized meetings to address concerns about potential hazards, such as the dumping ground where Ethan had been found. City officials responded, promptly sending crews to clean up the area and install better lighting and security measures. Children learned valuable lessons about staying aware of their surroundings and respecting boundaries. Games like hide-and-seek, once played recklessly near dangerous areas, were now confined to safer spaces within sight of adults. At the heart of it all was Bruno. His presence served as a constant reminder of the power of kindness and the importance of looking beyond surface impressions. Those who had once judged him unfairly now saw him as a symbol of hope and resilience. Even Officer Martinez, who had initially dismissed Bruno as nothing more than a stray, found himself reflecting on the encounter. As he typed up his report later that day, he included a note about the dog's pivotal role in locating Ethan. Without him, he wrote, "We might not have found the boy in time." By midsummer, Bruno's legend had grown beyond Willow Street. Local newspapers picked up the story, publishing articles that celebrated the heroic dog and his quiet, unassuming master. A reporter even visited the neighborhood to interview residents, capturing their thoughts and memories of Bruno's acts of bravery. "He saved my son," Sarah said during one such interview, her voice trembling with emotion. "I don't know what we would have done without him." Others echoed similar sentiments. their admiration for Bruno growing with each retelling of the story. "He's like a guardian angel," someone remarked during a casual conversation outside the corner store. "A true hero," another agreed, nodding emphatically. The article was published alongside a photo of Bruno lying contentedly on Mr. Henry's porch, his deep brown eyes filled with wisdom and calm. Readers across the city marveled at the dog's story, sending letters of appreciation and offers of support. One reader even donated a custom-made bed for Bruno, complete with plush cushions and embroidered paw prints. When it arrived, Mr. Henry chuckled softly, shaking his head in disbelief. "You're living like royalty now, boy," he said, patting Bruno affectionately. Bruno settled into the new bed with a contented sigh, his tail wagging lazily. For Tommy, whose life Bruno had saved months earlier, the bond with the dog had deepened into something almost sacred. Every afternoon he visited Mr. Henry's house, bringing snacks and toys to share. Sometimes they would sit together on the porch, talking about school soccer and other adventures. Other times they simply enjoyed each other's company, finding comfort in the quiet companionship only animals can offer. "You're amazing," Bruno Tommy declared one sunny afternoon, tossing a ball for the dog to fetch. "You've saved so many people. You're like a superhero." Bruno retrieved the ball and dropped it at Tommy's feet, his tail wagging lazily. In saving others, Bruno had become more than just a pet or companion. He had become a part of the community's collective memory, a living testament to the power of loyalty, compassion, and trust. Sometimes the greatest heroes are the ones we least expect. And sometimes their acts of bravery remind us of the importance of looking beyond appearances, of recognizing the value in those who may seem ordinary, but possess extraordinary hearts.